Thank you very much. Um, Thank you very much for inviting Neo4j to this learning festival, and we're really very privileged and honored to be able to share how graphs can benefit the Singapore government. So before I start, I just want to lay the context. The graphs that I'm going to share is not the graphs that you learned in school, not the x-axis or y-axis type of graph, but really a graph which is a graph data platform. So let me just start with this introduction on the exponential growth of graph technology. This is a report from DB Engines, which is a global ranking website that shows the popularity of databases over time. And if you look at this chart, you'll see that in the period of the last 8 years, graph databases has been growing at a very, very fast speed compared to the other types of graphs like relational databases, which is actually a very stable but very stagnant growth type of database. So you'll see that graphs have actually been very, very popular. And in this session, I'll actually be sharing the reason why that is so and how it can be applied to you in the Singapore government agencies context. Now, so this is also another quote by Gartner that says that 50% of Gartner inquiries on the topics on data analytics, which is a very popular area, will involve the discussion on the use of graph technology. So what we are seeing is that even within the areas of analytics, data science, machine learning, graphs will be a very important component to supplement data analytics. And on the left, if you look at, again, DB Engines, you'll see that graph database is actually among the top 20 most popular databases, and Neo4j is the most popular graph data platform within that category. So let me just share a little bit about Neo4j as a company. So Neo4j, we are a leader in graph technology. We have been founded since 2007, and we have offices worldwide. We are founded in Sweden, and our headquarters is actually in Silicon Valley. And what is really interesting is that we have started our presence in Asia Pacific, and Singapore is our APAC headquarters. And we have thousands of customers worldwide that cuts across different industries, from financial institutions to retail, telecoms, and of course, government. Government is a very key an important segment that Neo4j is into. So if you look at this, some of the leading governments in the world, including Homeland Security, Danish Business Authority, NASA from the US, as well as there are some government agencies in Singapore that are also already using Neo4j. And the thing about Neo4j is that you can deploy any way you like it, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud, or even database as a service. Now, so going into that momentum of graph database, we had some very interesting announcement just last week. So what happened last week was that Neo4j actually raised the largest round of funding in the database history. We are into the Series F funding, and we raised $325 million. And out of this funding, the bulk of the money will actually be spent to invest in enhancing the product even further, as well as to invest in people and to grow our presence globally, including Asia Pacific and Singapore in particular. The second announcement is related to the continuous evolution in our product. So last week we launched version 4.3, which is our latest version, which has a lot of significant improvements and enhancements. And of course, we also demonstrated how we break the boundaries of scale. We demonstrated a graph that can traverse through 1.2 trillion nodes and relationships in less than 20 milliseconds. So it's a very, very exciting time to be in the graph technology space. And closer to home, in Singapore, in May, we were actually very honored to be awarded the bulk tender organized by GovTech, the data science and AI category. So we were the only vendor in the graph data platform category. And thank you to GovTech and the Singapore's government confidence in Neo4j. So I've been talking about Graph Data Platform or Graph Database. So what really is Graph Data Platform? So let me just start off by laying the context to distinguish the difference between a graph database and that of a traditional database. Now, I'm sure many of you here will be fairly familiar with a traditional relational database like an Oracle, a DB2, or a Microsoft SQL Server. These technologies has been around for the last 40 to 50 years, very mature, and your agency would most likely have one or more of such technologies. Traditional databases are really good for transaction processing, for business intelligence, and to a certain extent, analytics. Data in a traditional database is represented in a table format, and the data is actually stored in rows and columns. And whenever you want to do queries, you will have to do table joins, right? And table joins will involve indexes, creation of primary and foreign keys. And all these are well and good really for the transaction processing use cases that many of you are already very familiar with. Graph database, on the other hand, represents the data very differently. Instead of a table, we actually represent data in the form of relationships. So what you see over here is that you'll see many small circles, and these are what we call nodes. Nodes are actually objects or entities that represent something, right? It can represent a person, it can represent a place, it can represent a transaction, and so on. And the arrows actually represents a relationship. So basically, how are the nodes related to one another, right? So this is the difference between a graph database and a relational database, whereby graph database really focuses on how data is being connected, related, and linked to one another. So in a real world, a typical graph will actually have millions or even billions of circles, or what we call nodes, and many more times that relationships, right? And you will be able to see a lot of linkages and patterns in a graph database. So the next question then is, if there is under what circumstances will a graph data platform be relevant, right, to a government agency? And the answer is very simple. Whenever you need to look at relationships in your data, whenever you need to look at context of your data, and whenever you need to look at broad patterns of your data, and you want to do that at very fast speed and at a very flexible way, that will be the time where a graph data platform will be highly relevant. And in the next few slides, I will be sharing with you a few case studies of how different government agencies are benefiting from a graph data platform. So let me just switch gear a little bit because I have actually introduced to you at a high level what is a graph data platform. And right now, I want to try to link this to Singapore government's priorities. As we know, we are actually living in a very difficult time. This is not the normal that we are used to for the last 50 years. And what we are trying to do as a country now is really to emerge stronger together from this pandemic. And to emerge stronger, there are really a few key priorities, right? In fact, there are quite a lot of priorities, but I have chosen a few which I thought that a graph data platform like Neo4j can add value, can help to value add in terms of the Singapore government priorities. So the first one is about preparing for the new normal, right? Government is talking about opening up, right? And how can we help in that sense? Number two is to keep Singapore safe and secure. And this has always been the mission and the goal of the Singapore government, not just physical security, but even cyber security. And of course, right now we have healthcare security and accelerating digital transformation. And in fact, point 3 and point 4 are very related. How to accelerate digital transformation and to upskill the workforce at the same time, because these two go hand in hand. So in the next few examples, I will share with you how Neo4j can actually be used to value add and to align to some of these government priorities. So of course, this is really about how Neo4j can support Singapore government to emerge stronger together as a digital nation and as a smart nation. So the first one is about the new normal, right? So, all of us have been living the last 18 months very, very difficult, right? I mean, first of all, we have the circuit breaker, and then things slowly open. And just when there was some form of normalcy, we start to see the heightened alert because of, the Delta strain and so on. And the new normal, as what government has mentioned, is that how can we really open up the economy without having to do very draconian measures like a circuit breaker or even trying to lock down certain sectors of the economy. This is so disruptive and it's so difficult. And the answer to do that really is in a few things, right? To be able to trace effectively, to isolate effectively, and to vaccinate widely, right? And I think these are some of the key strategies and methods to hit the new normal. And so where graph database like Neo4j can do is we are able to represent a lot of this data together and be able to look at potential outbreaks, potential strains, and be able to link that to things like vaccines, cures, and even contact tracing. So with a graph database, because we are able to see the data in a much more way that is being linked. So when it comes to things like contact tracing, who should we contact trace? Who should we isolate? And where are the pockets that we really need to accelerate vaccination? This can be represented and visualized and analyzed a lot more effectively in a graph database like Neo4j. So that is the first case study, first example. Second example is, the second initiative is really to how can we help keep Singapore safe and secure. So one of the key initiatives is really about how can we keep our borders safe, right? And this is really very important because Singapore is an open economy and we have people coming in and going out, very freely. So how can we have an open border and yet ensuring safety and security? And this is where, using a graph data platform, we are able to look at people coming in and out, and based on their background, and do some real-time and analytical capabilities to be able to see whether are there any persons of interest or persons that are of certain danger level, right, coming into Singapore, whether are they coming in to commit a crime or are they coming in to smuggle, traffic, and to be able to catch these people very, very quickly at the border. So this is something that Neo4j does very well because we are able to connect the dots and to link the relationships of the different travelers. And from an immigration perspective, help to keep Singapore safe. The next one is, of course, fighting financial crimes. Now, as we go into digital economy, as we go into digital transformation, we are also starting to see a lot of cyber crimes, a lot of financial crimes, and the amount of people being scammed is also increasing significantly. So one of the key ways that Neo4j helps our government agencies as well as financial institutions is to fight anti-money laundering, right? So we know that there are a lot of people coming in and doing things like money tripping, setting up different commercial entities for the purpose of cleaning their money, right? Or for the purpose of illegal transactions. And with Neo4j being able to represent these entities, these transactions in a very complete manner, right? We are able to look at this network of transactions and network of people and be able to nip them at the bud very, very effectively. The next one is really about serving our citizens and residents. Now, of course, we have this Live SG, which is really to trace a Singaporean throughout the entire journey of their lifetime, right? From the time when they are born, to the time they go to school, to the time where they are employed, medical, retirement, and so on. So how to have that single view, this experience, right, of an entire Singaporean in a lifetime. So with a graph database like Neo4j, we will be able to map a citizen's journey, right? From the time that he's born, which school he goes to, what is he or she studying, what job is this person into, to the types of retirement plans in CPF, housing, and so on. And we can map this together in a big knowledge graph so that we can actually, as a government, be able to tailor programs specific to this individual, as well as to see if some of these programs are being effectively executed and implemented, right? So that we can serve our citizens and residents more effectively. And the last point is really about being future ready, right? So one of the key priorities that we mentioned earlier involve accelerating digital transformation. And as a process, we need to upskill our workers. And we know that there are a few areas, right, in ICT that are very in demand, right? So one of it will be in areas of agile skills, data analytics, and user experience. And where Neo4j will really fit will be in the area of analytics, because as a network graph, we are able to help government agencies and even other businesses be able to do data analytics in a much more effective manner. So if you look at this, we can help agencies to be able to look at the skill sets within their organization, right? Within your agency, you will be able to know what your employee, at a glance, right? What type of skill sets your employees will have based on what he has studied in school, what positions he has taken, experience, certification, awards, and so on. So a 360-degree view of their skill sets. And with that, you can then do a proper recommendation on how you would like this person to upskill themselves, right? Continuous learning, targeted learning, recommended learning. So again, using a graph data platform like Neo4j, right? So what I have done in the last few minutes was really to share with you some of the practical examples on how Neo4j can be applied in the Singapore government to open up the economy, to trace, to isolate, to keep our borders safe, and to upskill in continuous learning and education. Now, and the next section, I just want to cover very, very briefly, because today is not going to be a technical session, because what I've done so far is to introduce you the case studies. And the next question then you ask is, okay, if I have the data in Neo4j, which is a database linking data together, having connections, how do I actually visualize and interact with the data? So I'm going to share with you this tool set called Neo4j Bloom, which is really our visualization tool for you to be able to search and to explore the graph in a very simple manner without having to write a single line of code, right? So this is really designed for end users, business users within the agency to just look at the patterns and trends, right, within the graph database. So this is how Bloom will look like. So the assumption is that the data has already been ingested and modeled within Neo4j, and now as an agency officer, for example, you want to look at the training or the skill set profile of a particular employee. So you can go in and just type the name of the employee, maybe skill sets of A, B, C, D, E, and then the graph of this particular person will show up with his or her relevant skill sets within his history. Right, so this is one way for you to be able to visualize the data in a graph data platform very easily. And the next one is on data science, because if you look at it, one of the key areas that is in a very in demand today is AI or AI ML data science. I mean, these are very similar terms. And what Neo4j can do is we actually bring data science to the next level, whereby we are focusing on the relationships of the data, right? Using the links and relationships in the data for data scientists or even data analysts to answer the right questions, right? So what does this do is very, very simple. So for some of you, who are into data science or machine learning, you will be very familiar with machine learning pipeline. You'll be very familiar with technologies like Python, R, Spark, and so on. And those are really great tools. And they are focused on discrete data that you have. So data from your databases or your data lakes, and you run your machine learning pipeline to look at, the customer 360 and so on. And where Neo4j does is that it takes it to another level, whereby instead of just looking at the data, it is really focused on the relationship of the data, right? And what does it mean will be as follows. So for example, in the course of an investigation, you might be looking for persons of interest, and you have the data in a graph. So you want to know, out of this data set you have, which are the more important people, so that you can zoom into them and to look at what other relationships that this person will have. So you can use graph data algorithms like centrality and importance to really see which is the important node that you are going to look at, right? Or if you want to look at, if you want to do things like path finding, to look at shortest path, the most optimal path. So in areas like logistics, how can you find the quickest path to go from point A to point B? So again, these are something that you can do this very easily using a graph algorithm in Neo4j. So basically, we have a very rich library of graph algorithms for you to actually analyze and run machine learning pipelines on the graph database. So if you are a data scientist, this would definitely be of interest to you. So let us recap, right? So I'm coming towards the end of my presentation. So I started off by mentioning that graph data platform is growing at a very significant pace compared to traditional relational database. Graph is growing the fastest. And then I explained the difference between a traditional relational database and a graph database. And I explained what is when would a graph data platform be relevant, right? So it is really when you are looking at relationships in the data, when you're looking at context and you're looking at patterns, and you want to do that at a very, very fast pace, that will be where Neo4j will be useful for you and your organization. So this will be, okay, my second last slide is really about progressing across the data maturity spectrum. So if you look at this chart, you'll see the typical journey that organizations will take, whether government organizations or private sector. When it comes to data, they typically go through this journey. The first part is really how to have what they call big data, right? And this is something that was very popular in the last 5 years, where companies are looking at, organizations are trying to bring data together into a big data lake, storing structured and unstructured data together. And then they use big data technologies like Hadoop, like Spark to analyze the data. And the next level then is, how then can they connect? How then can we connect the data together? Because you already have data sitting in your data lakes and in your data warehouses. The next step is to connect this data together so that they can bring knowledge, insight, and wisdom. And this is the area of a graph data platform like Neo4j. Right? So this is the second last slide. And really, the next steps is that you will ask is, okay, so all this technology, well and good, sounds very interesting, sounds very promising. So how can I start, right? How can I start? How can I explore projects using Neo4j? So I have a 8-step program for you, right? 8-step pointers for you that can potentially help you to implement projects in your agency using Neo4j. The first is to come together, right, to look at what are the business challenges that can be solved by graph. So remember when I mentioned earlier on that graph database will be useful if you are looking at relationship, you are looking at patterns, and you're looking at context. So your business problem must be on the basis that you're looking at certain links, right? So whether it is in the area of investigation, whether it's in the area of contact tracing, or whether it's in the area of looking at conflict of interest, or anything where data needs to be connected, then that will be a good use case for you to consider graph. On the other hand, there will be certain situations where graph may not be relevant. So for example, if all you want to do is, for example, just to do reporting or BI, business intelligence, then I would recommend you not to use graph, but just to continue with relational database, right? That might be a more suitable solution for you, right? So that is really the first step. Identify your business problems that can be solved with graph, and they tend to involve relationships, connections, links, and patterns in the data. So that's number one. Second step then is, how do you think the data should be linked into in a graph, right? So if you want to look at, say, a 360-degree view of a citizen, right, from the time he's born to what school he goes to, what job he goes to, and what investments he take, and so on, model that on a whiteboard, right? And so of course we will, I will share more with you on this in subsequent follow-up sessions if possible. So do that modeling on the whiteboard and translate that whiteboard into a graph data model. And the translation of your model of the whiteboard into Neo4j is actually fairly simple, right? There are certain tools that can actually help you to do that. But what is really cool about Neo4j is that whatever you whiteboard will be what you will store within the database, all right? So once you create your data model, then you start to map, where can I get the data from, right? Most likely your data will come from your transactional systems, will come from your relational databases, it will come from flat files, it will come from even third-party APIs, right? So different sources. Identify those sources and work on the data mapping and the data pipelining. So how do you take the data from those systems into Neo4j and then to model that data? Next is you build a minimum viable product, right? Or sometimes we call it a prototype on Neo4j, right? So with the data, you start to analyze, you start to look at patterns, you start to investigate on those data, right? And then point 6 is you test your minimum viable product against point 1. Does it solve your business problem? If you are looking at Citizens 360, will your graph indeed tell you Citizens 360 in a very, very quick and easy way? If you are looking at investigation on persons of interest, does your graph help you to do that much more effectively, right? So test that, and if it meets your objective, then scale this and productionize it, right? Put this into production. And of course, the last part is this whole continuous enablement and continuous learning through this Neo4j Graphs for SG program, which will be shared later, sometime next week, right? So this will actually involve things like training and online enablement, right? So these are 8 practical steps for you to look at how you can consider implementing potential projects using Neo4j. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, right? This is my email address. Feel free to write to me. We can always organize workshops for you and your agency, and we'll be more than happy to listen to your business challenges and work out potential solutions on how Neo4j can actually value add in this area of graph data platform. Right, with that, I finished my presentation, and I just want to have some Q&A, and I see some questions, right? So, okay, I saw a question. What sort of projects are Neo4j currently working on in collaboration with agencies in Singapore? What are the challenges faced? Okay, very, very good question. So I shall not name the agency in particular, but I give you some general terms. So there's one agency that that has gone live with Neo4j, and they are looking at conflict of interest in the areas of payments for the vendors, right? So this agency does a lot of transactions, right? Payments and so on. And so they do payments, they do vendor creation, and so on. And how do we make sure that this vendor that is being created in the system and to be paid is a legitimate vendor, right? So of course, they need to submit all these documents to prove that it is a legitimate vendor. And on paper, it is legitimate, but in reality, it could be that this vendor would be a relative of this government officer, right? Or, this government officer would have an indirect shareholding in this company, and therefore there are conflict of interest, right? So for them to be able to capture this and catch this type of conflicting situations using they use Neo4j, right? So just by typing in the name of the vendor, the graph will come out, right? And you'll be able to see, are there potential shareholding conflict, or even is this vendor in the blacklisted database, and so on. So that is one example of this government agency. Second one, of course, we are also working with some, I would say, fairly sensitive ministries. I wouldn't name the name, but if I say sensitive, you more or less get that. And some of these things that they do involve keeping Singapore safe, right? So I will just stop at there. And number 3 is, of course, we are also working with GovTech and GovTech is working with us to actually also deploy Neo4j. So that is what we are seeing, right, so far. And there is a lot of interest, right, like I mentioned, in the areas of keeping Singapore safe, in the area of really identifying areas of contact tracing, isolation, vaccination, and all that. So we are talking to a lot of these related agencies that involve in all this. Second question, what are your top 3 tips for agencies to communicate key messages to Singapore public? Wow, I'm not sure if I really understand this question, or am I like the best in an appropriate position to give advice on this. But I would say like this, right? To communicate key messages to the Singapore public, I think the key thing is to be transparent, to be upfront, and to be honest, right? Because the time that we are living in today is very different from 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Today, there's so much information, there's so much competing voices, right? And some of them are real, some of them are fake. And what people really want, what the public wants, or at least from my personal perspective, and this is from me, right? It doesn't represent Neo4j, is that we want to hear authentic, real, and honest messages, right? So communicate clearly, communicate honestly, communicate directly, call a spade, and the way that again, how Neo4j can really help is to back a lot of facts with data, right? So if you say certain things, and if you can back this up with data that shows how things are linked together, right? Not just about the data itself, but how these things are linked together, and having that right context, that proper context. And when you take that and communicate, then people will understand better, right? So it's not just only mentioning a fact, but providing that context and that insights, right? I think that will be that will be my answer, right? Again, this is not a question that I'm an expert to be able to answer. Yeah. Any other questions? So far, there are only 2 questions. Okay. Feel free to send your questions on the chat group, right? Feel free. Okay. Maybe if there's no question, but let me just again say a few more things. Like maybe the next question you may have is that, okay, Neo4j or Graph database is very interesting, and and I've shared with you how to get started and all that. But maybe inside your mind is, what are the type of skill sets? What are the type of qualifications that and that you will need to pick this skill up, right? That this new skill sets up. So the answer is actually very simple. As long as you have as long as you know database, right? You understand relational database. If you know languages like R and Python, even better, though not necessary. As long as you understand how the construct of a database, and you have curiosity, you want to learn, Neo4j is a fairly easy database to pick up, right? So that is something that I want to leave you with. And if there are no further questions, I just want to thank you for once again for inviting Neo4j to this learning festival. We are really very privileged and honored, and I look forward for you to email me if you have any questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.